Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, co-host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is March the 11th, 2024. It has been 3,696 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 20 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 17 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened over the weekend, and a special report, What Happened to Ramzan Kadyrov. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian male bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is the daily assessment. 1. The Kremlin has failed in its plan to capture the remainder of the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts by the start of the Russian sham presidential elections. 2. In our assessment, the revisiting of the October 2022 Russian threats to use nuclear weapons, which we had previously assessed was a very low risk, is part of a Russian hybrid warfare campaign embraced by elements of the United States government to discourage additional military and financial support for Ukraine. 3. The United States has ended financial and military aid to Ukraine unless there is an unforeseen event that changes congressional leadership before the 2024 elections. 4. We maintain, and multiple analysts have aligned with our March the 7th assessment, that Ukraine stabilized its defensive lines, with fighting continuing in the same 500 to 1500 meter wide strip. 5. We assess that Ukraine's artillery shortage has been partially resolved, with the first batch of the 170,000 to 195,000 155mm artillery rounds promised by the European Union arriving. This is separate from the Czech Republic-led initiative. 6. While Russia holds the initiative throughout the theater of war, the ability to sustain intense combat operations in more than 3 areas of operation has culminated. 7. Despite the improving situation, we maintain that Ukraine continues to use a Fabian strategy to wear down Russian combat power while conserving resources. 8. Ukraine's acute shortage of air defense missiles will become catastrophic by April. 9. Other analysts have aligned with our early assessment that Ukraine has established strategic control of the Western and Central Black Sea. 10. The Kremlin is preparing to complete the transformation of the governmental structure into a dictatorship, culminating after the results of the sham presidential elections are released. 11. While the possibility of an intentional nuclear accident caused by Russian occupiers at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant remains low, the condition is more serious than what the International Atomic Energy Agency is reporting. 12. Russian aligned assets have co-opted the ongoing Polish border blockade, which has become an open act of hybrid warfare against Ukraine and the Baltic states. We begin today's war report in Donbas, in northeast Donetsk Oblast, because there is little to report from Kharkiv and Luhansk Oblasts. In the Siversk area of operation, also known as NAO, Russian forces restarted attacks on Spirne without success. In the Soledar AO, Russian forces continued their attacks in the direction of Rozdolivka and remained unable to advance. In the Bakhmut AO, Russian mercenary blogger Wogonzo claimed that fighting was ongoing in Bogdanivka without evidence. There were numerous claims that Russian forces had advanced deeper into Ivanivska, but after geolocating the available pictures and videos, we concluded there had been no change to the line of conflict. In the Klishchiivka AO, after a failed March the 8th attempt to reach Klishchiivka from the north, intense positional fighting shifted, with Russian forces attempting to advance from the northeast. The failed attack included a Russian company of mechanized infantry supported by a company of light infantry. The armored column never reached the line of conflict, with 13 infantry fighting vehicles, 3 UAZ-452 loaves, in North America you would know them as Scooby-Doo vans, a Ural truck with an S-60 anti-aircraft gun mounted to it, and 2 tanks destroyed. We'll link to the video in our daily situation report, and there is more information in the podcast description. Fighting also continued east and south of Avdiivka. To the west, Russian forces shelled and bombed Chasiv Yar, killing a pensioner in his home. In southwest Donetsk Oblast, Ukrainian forces have stabilized defensive lines in the Avdiivka AO, further east than previously assessed. A significant increase in Ukrainian artillery support, a widening advantage in the number of first-person view or FPV one-way drones, and poorly trained Russian troops have stalled out the Russian offensive. Almost 70% of the Russian-initiated ground attacks theater-wide were from Avdiivka to Orikhiv. West of Avdiivka, fighting continued east of Berdichi, east of Semenivka, in the western and central part of Orlivka, and east of Tonenke. Russian forces were pushed out of the southern part of Orlivka, and their flags have been removed. The Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Infantry Brigade lost its 4th M1A1 Abrams main battle tank in a week. The brigade's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Dmytro Rumshin, was relieved of duty, and Colonel Yan Yatsishin from the 56th Motorized Brigade was put in command. Rumshin was relieved after a series of questionable decisions, including using the limited number of M1A1 Abrams for tactical operations. This is the third commander for the 47th Brigade in 6 months. Further south, Russian attempts to advance deeper into the eastern part of Pervomaiske and toward the Ukrainian firebase at Nevelske continued without success. The settlement of Dobropilla was hit by 3 Shahed-136 one-way drones, striking residential areas and 2 administrative buildings. 2 bodies were pulled from the rubble. Mirnograd was hit by 3 UMPB D-30 SN guided glide bombs, wounding 11, including a child and a 95-year-old pensioner. The bombing heavily damaged 10 high-rise apartment buildings. This is the first time this type of munition has appeared. On March the 8th, Ukrainian fighter pilot Major Andriy Tkachenko was killed when his MiG-29 fighter was shot down near Pokrovsk. Tkachenko had been flying with the Ukrainian Air Force since 2014. In the Vuhledar AO, fighting continued south and east of Krasnogorivka, east of Georgievka, and on the southwest edge of Pobeda, with no change in the situation. Russian attempts to consolidate earlier gains within Novomykhailivka were unsuccessful, with heavy fighting continuing. To the southwest, Russian forces attempted to advance on Vuhledar from Shevchenko and southwest of Pavlivka, suffered significant losses and returned to their previous defensive positions. In occupied Dokuchayevsk, Russian collaborator Igor Tsiferov was killed when he started his car and it exploded. In Zaporizhzhia Oblast, Russian forces supported by Chechen Akhmat continued intense attacks in the Orikhiv AO. Late last week, a Russian attempt to advance into Robotine failed, with the Chechen Akhmat Special Forces commander killed by a drone operator of the Ukrainian 128th Mountain Assault Brigade. After intense attacks on Friday and Saturday, lighter fighting continued northwest of Verbove. Southwest of Orikhiv, Russian forces tested Ukrainian defenses north of Nesteryanka, using reconnaissance in force, suffered losses, and returned to their defensive positions. Russian troops have increased the use of drone-delivered K-51 tear gas hand grenades in violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. The spokesperson for the Tavria Strategic Operational Group of Ukraine, Dmytro Lekhovy, reported that 50 K-51s had been used in the last week, with 15 dropped on March the 10th. The International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) provided an update on the status of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, ZNPP. On March the 6th, the Director General of the IAEA, Rafael Mariano Grossi, met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Sochi to, quote, help prevent a nuclear or radiological accident during the ongoing conflict. Grossi described his meeting with Putin as, quote, professional and frank, as Russia's occupation of Europe's largest nuclear power plant enters its third year. Grossi repeated that the nuclear safety and security situation remains precarious, with 6 out of the 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security fully or partially compromised. At the NPP, the IAEA monitors at the site continued to hear explosions and other indications of military activity not far from the plant. 3 times this week, they reported hearing several successive explosions within a few minutes, as well as 1 explosion on March the 7th and multiple explosions on March the 8th, indicating the use of heavy weapons from an area close to the plant. The NPP has been relying on a single 750 kV external power connection for 3 weeks, with no progress made on repairing the 330 kV backup line. After last week's promise that it would be fixed by March the 1st, the IAEA was informed that reconnection is at least a week away. Inspector access remains restricted across the NPP, with the IAEA barred from entering the western parts of the turbine halls for reactors 3 and 5. There was no update on boron, water and oil leaks in 4 of the 6 reactors. No update on the status of the roofs of reactors 1, 5 and 6, and still no walkthrough of turbine halls 1 through 6 in sequence. Here is what's happening in the Black Sea, occupied Crimea, Mykolaiv and Odesa. Since the sinking of the Sergei Kotov, there have been no ships of the Black Sea Fleet sent on patrol in the last 6 days. The loss of 8 warships in the last 8 months, stretched repair facilities, and the inability to reload Kalibr cruise missiles in occupied Sevastopol has brought fleet operations to a halt. Russian state media reported that the commander of all Russian naval forces, Admiral Nikolai Yevmenov, has been relieved of his command. The former commander of the Russian Northern Fleet, Admiral Alexander Moiseev, has been named the acting commander. Moving to assessment. While Ukraine has gained strategic control of the central and western Black Sea, Russian warships won't stay in port indefinitely. Due to Russia's top-down command structure, the change in the naval forces commander has introduced an operational pause. Subordinates of Admiral Moiseev will wait for new orders due to internal politics and fear. The Crimean Tatar insurgent organization Atesh observed Russian occupiers removing machinery and spare parts for ship repairs from occupied Sevastopol. The material is reportedly being moved to Tamань in the Krasnodar Krai region of Russia. In our assessment, the parts and equipment will be moved by rail to Novorossiysk to bolster repair capabilities. In Odessa on March the 9th, drone debris struck an industrial building, causing minor to moderate damage and a small fire. There were no injuries. I have more information about more exploding things in Russia. The governor of the Kursk region, Roman Starovoyt, reported that an oil depot was struck in the city of Kursk, destroying an oil tank capable of holding 3,000 metric tons of fuel. The tank was reportedly empty. In the Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug in the settlement of Lykhma, a 1.4-meter-wide gas pipeline ruptured due to neglect, per Russian officials, and exploded. The pipeline was buried 2 meters underground, and it was claimed that operations weren't significantly impacted. The governor of the Leningrad region, Alexander Drozdenko, reported that a ground stop was issued at Pulkovo airport in St. Petersburg due to a Ukrainian drone attack. Shortly after, Russian officials reported all drones were shot down. A fire erupted at a 1,000-square-meter hangar in an industrial area next to the airfield, with 2 injuries reported. On March the 9th, up to 40 Ukrainian drones targeted the Beriev aircraft company in Taganrog. Satellite images showed at least 4 drones struck the repair facility, penetrating the roof. An A-50 AWACS that was awaiting repair reportedly disappeared from the tarmac and may have been in the main building during the strike.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is my theater-wide update. On March the 9th and the 10th, Russia launched 39 Shahed-136 one-way drones, with 35 shot down. It's unclear why Ukrainian air defenses have improved in the last 2 to 4 weeks. Russia is on track to use 400 to 450 Shaheds this month. Over the weekend, the number of Russian airstrikes using FAB and UMPK glide bombs increased significantly. Since March the 1st, Russia has dropped 799 bombs on Ukraine, which puts the VKS on track to use a record-setting 2,400 bombs in March. Predictions and assessments in June and July 2023 that Russia was outproducing Ukraine 5-1 in FPV one-way drones and had perfected electronic warfare aged like room temperature milk. From June to August 2023, Russian forces reached parity with Ukraine and then started to fall behind. The production gap is widening now in favor of Ukraine, and the improvements in Russian electronic warfare were only temporary. The Foreign Minister of Poland, Radoslaw Sikorski, sent another shockwave through European nations, claiming that some NATO nation troops were already operating within Ukraine. He did not elaborate on which nations, how many, or in what capacity. The statement is instantly correct, technically. For example, the United States Embassy in Kyiv has a contingent of US Marines, but this is standard procedure at embassies around the world. Canada announced it would provide Ukraine with 83,000 70mm CRV-7 rockets, which are the Canadian version of the United States Hydra rocket. The munitions can be launched from the air or ground and were slated for disposal because newer versions had been produced. No timetable for delivery was announced. Using a pair of 19 tube launches, it's enough rockets for more than 2,100 combat sorties. The sharp increase in Ukrainian artillery strikes is almost certainly driven by the 170,000 to 195,000 artillery shells promised for March delivery by the European Union reaching Ukraine. The Czech Republic-led initiative will provide another 800,000 shells, and the EU is still committed to delivering more than 500,000 shells from April to December. The Minister of Economy and Industry for Bulgaria, Bogdan Bogdanov, reported that his country had produced more ammunition than the rest of Europe combined. The minister committed to submitting a proposal to build a state-owned factory to produce gunpowder, which is in short supply. Bogdanov said that a large part of the production was slated for Ukraine and our Euro-Atlantic partners. The Secretary of Defense of Canada, Bill Blair, blamed the United States for the continued delays in shipping an NASAMS air defense system promised to Ukraine last year. Blair said the hold-up was due to US not funding their part of the agreed deal. During a meeting with Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, US presidential Republican hopeful Donald Trump told the European leader that his peace plan is to cut off all military and financial aid to Ukraine if he becomes president. For the land of Mobiks, Mobilization and Mir, I have a special report. Where did aspiring dentist and warlord Colonel General Ramzan Kadyrov go? In the fall of 2022, he was a rising star, with whispers that he was a candidate to replace Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu or Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov. Since then, a number of factors have come together to dim Kadyrov's star significantly. First and foremost, Chechen Rosgvardia and Akhmat forces have consistently performed poorly on the battlefield. In September 2022, Chechen forces were sent to Mayorsk near Gorlivka and in less than a week were pushed back almost 3 kilometers. The ground they lost took members of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic First Army Corps over 2 months to capture. In June 2023, Chechen forces were sent to Marinka as fixers and also lost ground. In July, the remnants were sent to Klishivka and Andriivka and contributed to Russia losing control of both settlements, including claims of retreating against orders. Second, in the fall of 2022, Kadyrov aligned himself with private military company Wagner Group's Yevgeny Prigozhin. The pair worked together, openly attacking Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu for the problems Russian troops were facing. By the winter, there was speculation that Prigozhin was positioning himself to create a new political party, and Kadyrov saw himself as the future Minister of Defense. In February 2023, when Prigozhin's ammunition shipments were cut, Kadyrov openly defied Moscow, providing some of his resources to Wagner Group. In May, when Prigozhin announced he would withdraw from Bakhmut against orders, Kadyrov criticized his ally but offered to take over the assault on the city. The letter he drafted to the Kremlin was immediately declined, and by June Kadyrov was distancing himself from the embattled PMC leader. Just before the Prigozhin insurrection, Shoigu mandated that all PMCs sign agreements that would hand over control of their forces to the Kremlin. At the time, Kadyrov's Chechen troops were operating outside of Moscow leadership, and he became the first leader to sign control of his forces over. The demand from Shoigu ultimately led to the short-lived Prigozhin insurrection and the destruction of the PMC. After the insurrection, there were clear indications that the trust between Kadyrov and Putin had been strained. The third issue is Kadyrov's handling of the arrest and pre-trial detention of Nikita Zhuravely, who was arrested in May 2023 for burning a Koran in Volgograd, Russia. For reasons that were never revealed, Zhuravely was transferred to Grozny. On September 26, Adam Kadyrov, Ramzan's teenage son, beat Zhuravely while he was held in pre-trial detention, publishing the video on Instagram. The incident sparked outrage in Russia, including drawing the attention of Maria Akhmedova on the Human Rights Council of the Russian Federation. Despite the public outcry, Kadyrov doubled down, giving his son the title of Hero of Chechnya for the beating and a string of other awards and honors. In the end, President Putin and the prosecutor's office declined to pursue the issue or open an investigation. Kadyrov then committed another gaffe, hosting convicted child molester, QAnon dabbler, and Russian propagandist Scott Ritter in Grozny. On January 5th, Ritter became Kadyrov's messenger, sharing an offer to release 20 Ukrainian prisoners of war in exchange for lifting sanctions against Kadyrov's family members. The stunt backfired, creating a furious backlash across Russia, forcing Kadyrov to backpedal and claim that Ritter was in on a joke meant to troll the West. Another reason for Kadyrov's low profile is directly tied to the poor performance of his Chechen forces. When Chechen troops have been forced to the line of conflict instead of operating as blocking forces or territorial guards, casualties have been exceptionally high. 2 years ago, Kadyrov oversaw huge ceremonies showing thousands of well-equipped Chechen forces being sent to Ukraine. Today, the numbers are in dozens or low hundreds, with a sharp increase in contract soldiers and foreigners. Kadyrov doesn't even attend the ceremonies. The decrease in number of Chechen troops, their poor performance, and their bad reputation haven't provided Chechen social media with many wins to exaggerate. And the last factor? Kadyrov became ill in the spring of 2022, with a lot of speculation that he contracted COVID. His health has noticeably deteriorated in the last 2 years, somewhat limiting his appearances. Kadyrov hasn't disappeared. even if it appears he has. A number of political mistakes and wild exaggerations about the capabilities of his troops have caused his influence within Putin's inner circle to fade. Finally, I have news about geopolitics and culture. In Los Angeles, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences gave the Academy Award for Best Feature-Length Documentary to 20 Days in Mariupol. During his acceptance speech, director Mstislav Chernov said, quote, "This is the first Oscar in Ukrainian history, and I am honored. But probably I will be the first director on the stage who will say, I wish I had never made this film. I wish to be able to exchange this for Russia never attacking Ukraine, never occupying our cities." Unquote. The team of Ukrainian artists and journalists risked their lives filming this documentary and carrying hidden raw videos through more than a dozen Russian checkpoints. I urge all our listeners who have courage to face the truth of this war, please watch 20 Days in Mariupol. Because, as Chernov said, although the past cannot be changed, we still can make sure that the history record is set straight and that the truth will prevail. The flag of Sweden will be added outside NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium, symbolically completing the accession of the Nordic nation to the NATO alliance. On Friday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to Turkey to meet with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Zelensky inspected the progress on 2 warships being built near Istanbul, discussed international relations and the shipping situation in the Black Sea. The former director of the Russian state media network Sputnik Lithuania admitted that the Kremlin has used hybrid warfare to incite riots in Lithuania and France through information warfare. Shocked, I tell you, shocked. A day later, the Swiss Federal Intelligence Service warned that Russia had dramatically increased hybrid warfare in Western Europe. Peter Ragley, the former head of the intelligence service, said, quote, "Europe is at war. Putin's goal is to destabilize Western Europe. This requires comprehensive intelligence gathering." Unquote. I think it needs a lot more than intelligence gathering. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.